Ed Nersessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center. We're delighted to have all of you here. And firstly, I want to thank NYU President John Sexton for making this whole thing occur. We're having another event here on May 7th, Meaning and Motivation, with NYU Professor Ned Block. So we're having two Philoctetes outreach events. And Regina Drew, who's sitting right over there, did a ton of work on this from NYU, and she has really made this happen, and we really thank you very much, Regina, for all the work you've done on this. Now, before we go on with today's program, I just wanted to announce a couple of other upcoming Philoctetes events. On April 26th, poetry continues at Philoctetes with Wallace Stevens' Words That Matter, with Susan Howe and Joan Richardson discussing. May 14th, we have poetry scholars and poetry critics with Harvard's Stephen Burt, Heather Dubrow from Fordham, Eric McHenry, Rachel Haddis, and Bonnie Costello. And our film program, we've had a film program recently in conjunction with the New York Psychoanalytic Institute's 100th anniversary program, and shown Synecdoche, New York was our last film, The Red Shoes, and A Letter from an Unknown Woman. And the fourth program in the series, April 15th, is one of my favorite films of all time, Wild Strawberries, and there'll be a discussion to follow. So please come to all of those events. Lastly, if you haven't been to the Philoctetes Center, and I see lots of familiar faces, please come. We have in our space a current exhibition of paintings that was tied to our show on portraiture, and it's portraiture, old, masters, and new. And some of the painters represented in that particular exhibition are Philip Pearlstein, Matthew Miller, David Pettibone, Jenny Dubnow, and Phyllis Herfield. Now, all Philoctetes events are simulcast. So right now, if you were at home when you went to www.philoctetes.org, you could see this particular event. And they are also recorded. If you go to past programming on our sites, you can see, say in 3 or 4 days, this particular event. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see the same event in about 3 days. I would say about 3 days, Miguel, it would be up. So without further ado, I'm now pleased to present Roger Copeland. Roger, I like to say, my first sight of Roger was about 40 years ago, carrying a tattered copy of L'Être et le Néant, the only person I know whose copy of Being and Nothingness had actually been read. So Roger is professor of theater now and dance at Oberlin College. His books include the widely used anthology What is Dance and Merce Cunningham, The Modernizing of Modern Dance. His essays about dance, theater, and film have appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, the Village Voice, the Drama Review, Partisan Review, American Theater, and many other publications. In 2000, he was awarded the Stage Bill Prize for the best article about American theater published the previous year, probably the best article ever published, being a student of Roger's work. His film about the psychological aftermath of 9/11, The Unrecovered, premiered at Anthology Film Archives in Manhattan in 2007 as part of the New Filmmakers series, and we also showed that particular film at the Philoctetes Center. Right. Also. Copeland has moderated a number of roundtables at the Philoctetes Center, including Diaghilev Cunningham, 1909-2009, Susan Sontag, Public Intellectual, Polymath, Provocatress, and The Critic as Thinker. And I give you Roger, who will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce all of our guests.
Nice. Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, Francis. And lest I forget to officially acknowledge the occasion that brings us all together this afternoon. Happy birthday, TW, wherever you are. Actually, our birthday card is arriving just about, well, I guess exactly a week late, because last Saturday, March 26th, was the official centenary of the birth of Tennessee Williams, arguably this country's greatest playwright, certainly its most imagistic, poetically inclined playwright. Now, alas, I didn't see a whole lot of hoopla last Saturday on CNN or MSNBC or even Saturday Night Live last weekend, and I forgot to check that Foxy network where Glenn Beck may have been uncovering some deep conspiratorial links between Tennessee Williams, the gay rights movement, and Islamic fundamentalism. But in any event, I'm going to take my responsibilities as moderator quite seriously, which is to say I'm going to try to moderate, not to legislate, and unless any of my fellow panelists become immoderate, shall we say, my job should be relatively easy. You actress, you. Okay. But I'll tell you what's not going to be easy is, speaking of fellow panelists, this is such a frighteningly distinguished bunch of people that it could probably take more time than NYU has allotted us to introduce them in a way that did justice to their remarkable careers. So ever so schematically, I'm going to start by introducing the artists in this room who are affiliated, however loosely, with one of my favorite theater companies of all time, Maude Mines. And let me begin with Lee Breuer, immediately to my right, one of the founding artistic directors of that great company. Now, anybody who has followed Lee's career knows that he's not only a visionary director, but also a distinguished writer and a lyricist. And to personalize this a bit, let me cut to the chase and just state flat out that Lee is responsible for a number of the most transcendent experiences I have ever had in the theater. Period. His visionary adaptation of Samuel Beckett's The Lost Ones was certainly one of the most thrilling adaptations of a Beckett text I have ever seen anywhere. His gospel at Colonus was, well, I'm sure a lot of you know, it's a gospel and blues-inspired adaptation of Sophocles' Oedipus at Colonus, and it's one of the very few productions of a classical Greek tragedy I've ever seen that captures the celebratory element of Greek tragedy, the element that most contemporary directors and commentators don't even know should be there in the first place. So he's great. Moving right along, I'm going to try to segue as gracefully as I can to the next panelist I want to introduce, the actress Maude Mitchell, the upstart over here. And the way I can most easily segue from Lee is to mention that Maude recently played Nora in Lee's production of Ibsen's A Doll's House, and I hasten to add there is now a wonderful film adaptation, which I assume is available on DVD,
yeah, it's available
right? Because you sent me a DVD, so I figure other people can get it. Maude is also an accomplished dramaturg, and she functioned in that very capacity for one of the Tennessee Williams productions that we're going to really zero in on this afternoon, and that is Lee's production of A Streetcar Named Desire, currently in repertory at the Comédie Française in Paris. And Lee, am I correct in proclaiming that this was the first time in the 400-year history of the Comédie Française that the main stage was given over to an American play directed by an American director?
That's correct, Roger.
Pretty fucking impressive.
One American director has directed a French version of
La Fontaine.
La Fontaine, and that was Robert Wilson.
Right.
And, a couple years ago, it also came to, I think, Lincoln Center Summerfest.
Right.
And this is the first time, however, that an American play has been directed by an American director, and we got the full treatment. We got the Richelieu Theater, the whole deal.
That is great.
It's not just an American, it's the first time a non-European playwright has been presented on the main stage of the Comédie Française.
Incredible. Well, we know how protective of their cultural identity those
I just wanted to add
French fries can be, yes.
Roger, I just want to add one thing, that though the Comédie Française credits read, there has to be one director and one designer, and that Basil Twist, came under the rubric of designer and I am the director. The fact of the matter is that it was kind of a mutual collaborative directorial design process, which Basil and I had done before. And this is what I wanted when I invited Basil to do this, to really come in as a complete physical director of the production. And this is why I think it turned out so good. So it's not exactly right that Basil's the designer, I'm the director. We're both kind of co director designers.
I hear a cell phone ringing. If it's Sarkozy, tell him that
We don't care.
we are respectful of his heritage. And anyway, well, speaking of Basil, the person that I wanted to introduce next, Basil, as Lee just mentioned, did decor and I guess a puppet, right?
I did build one puppet for the show.
I mean, if you're going to get Basil Twist and you're not going to have him build at least one puppet, you are really not utilizing him very, very well, because as I'm sure a lot of you know, Basil Twist is, I think without question, the most inventive puppeteer
I used
maybe
the term
in the whole world.
arguably again. I use the term arguably again. You know.
And most of us, a lot of us first got to know Basil's work when he created a wondrous underwater musical visualization of Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. And to the best of my knowledge, I'd love to do a whole panel just on this. I think it was the first time I've ever seen puppetry that was essentially abstract, in the sense that, you think of most puppets and they usually represent a character or a something, and here the inanimate objects were animated in such a way that it was just line, form, color, texture to the music, and that alone was pretty unusual, I think. And Basil has done, he's a third generation, comes from this family of distinguished puppeteers. He does every variety of puppetry. If you've seen his adaptation of Stravinsky's Petrushka, you have seen, I think, to me, it's a better version of Petrushka than any ballet company's Petrushka I've ever seen. He is also somebody who definitely crosses the high-low cultural divides. You may have seen his work on Broadway in the Pee Wee Herman Show on Broadway, and his work can still be seen in that most unexpected of Broadway successes, the apparently critic-proof musical adaptation of The Addams Family, which, despite Ben Brantley saying it's almost as bad as Spider-Man, is still running really, really well. And because of the squid, exactly. And for all I know, Basil may well be in negotiations as we speak with the producers of Spider-Man, turn off the bad publicity, hoping that he will somehow salvage it. But now let me turn my attention to a relatively late addition to today's event. Greg Merton, who is over there, and Greg's a longtime member, a co-artistic director of Maude Minds. He's going to appear this afternoon with Maude in a stage reading of an excerpt from Lee Breuer's latest Tennessee Williams project, a mashup of The Glass Menagerie and the two-character play, right? And so that'll sort of be the centerpiece of the afternoon in a little while. And Greg appeared in some of the earliest works by Lee that I saw back in the late 70s, The Saint and the Football Players, Shaggy Dog animation. And Greg also directed the great late Ron Vaughter, one of the saints of downtown theater, in a marvelous collage juxtaposing Roy Cohn and Jack Smith, a really interesting pairing, to be sure. So there's no shortage of working artists on this panel, but in order to properly honor the prolific Tennessee Williams, we also need to enlist the services of some heavyweight scholars and critics as well. And I think we've done a pretty good job in that department, too. Immediately to my left is Enoch Brater, who holds one of those ultra-distinguished professorships at the University of Michigan, one of those titles that does not flow trippingly on the tongue, but I'll do my I'll do my best here. Okay, deep breath. Enoch is the Kenneth T. Rao Collegiate Professor of Dramatic Literature and Professor of English and Theater at The University of Michigan. How'd I do? How'd I do? All right. Okay. And he is, well, I'll tell you, the main reason I was so excited to be able to get him to be on this panel is that I've known for a very, very long time his work on Arthur Miller. And Miller and Williams were the two big names in serious American theater following the Second World War. And Professor Brater's many Miller-related publications include Arthur Miller, A Playwright's Life and Works, Arthur Miller's America, Arthur Miller's Global Theater, How an American Playwright is Performed on Stages Around the World. He's currently editing the personal diaries and notebooks of Arthur Miller, and his book, The Falsetto of Reason, 10 Ways of Thinking About Samuel Beckett, someone very different from Arthur Miller. That book will appear later this spring. And finally, lest anybody accuse the panel of not having a bona fide Tennessee Williams expert, I would call their attention to Joe Jeffries, who teaches right here at NYU in the Tisch School of the Arts. He's in theater studies, and he functioned as the dramaturg this past January for Travis Chamberlain's much-praised site-specific production of Williams' Green Eyes at the Hudson Hotel. Joe's also serving as dramaturg for, and I don't even know about this work, Williams' last full-length play, unpublished, right? And still unproduced. And what's the title?
It's called In Mask, Outrageous and Austere.
Wow.
It's a line from an Eleanor Wiley poem.
Wow.
Sometimes the dramaturgy and the title are equally clunky, but we'll see.
And Joe also produces a series called Drag Show Video Verite, and I suspect Joe would have had a very good time with myself, my friend Naomi, and me at Dance Theater Workshop last night, where we watched the divine drag artist Richard Booth incarnate both the body and the soul of Martha Graham. So, all right, well, so we've got 5 minutes left now to, in that 5 minutes, I would like to elaborate just a little bit on the title that the Philoctates organizers came up with for this event, which is Realism and Expressionism in the Work of Tennessee Williams. And for me, at least, the $64,000 question is really posed in the little blurb here that also appears on the Philo website. And the question is whether or not in that scene in Streetcar when Mitch tears the paper lantern off the light bulb and forces Blanche's face up into the raw, unmediated light, and she's resisting and says, I don't want realism. I want magic. Yes, magic. When she says that, is she speaking directly for Tennessee Williams? Does Tennessee Williams, as a playwright, want to emphasize the magic more than the realism? And is there a chance that we've done him, until recently, a bit of a disservice in that the first Broadway productions, the first production of Streetcar was directed by Elia Kazan, who then also had virtually the same cast in the legendary 51 film, and Kazan was also the director of a number of early Arthur Miller plays on Broadway as well. And I was going to ask Professor Brater to begin and talk about whether or not Kazan, coming out of the group theater, coming out of the actor's studio, having a strong realistic bias, may have de-emphasized those elements of Williams that we could call expressionist or plastic. And Joe, I know we're going to talk a little bit about his notion of what he means by a plastic theater as well. But Enoch, if you want to start things off.
Okay. Well, I'm going to begin by saying that when we're dealing with we're at a very interesting and critical moment in dealing with these plays of this remarkable period in American theater history of the 40s, three biggies that we talk about all the time. We're celebrating Tennessee Williams, but there's also the late O'Neill plays that are appearing during this period, Iceman and Long Day's Journey into Night, and of course the Arthur Miller plays. So we had really kind of a remarkable period in our theater history when we had three extremely interesting new voices coming to the stage. And when we think about this today, and a group like Maude and their work is very important in this context, we have to figure out what are we supposed to do with this material. I mean, how do we keep this fresh? How do we keep this alive? How do we recover what was essentially the spirit of these plays when they were first done? For some of us, it may seem odd to think about these writers as experimental writers in their work, but in fact, in their time, they were. I mean, we can't really think about it in terms of where the theater is today. I mean, we think about the remarkable plays that Williams was writing at the time, and the difficulty of trying to get them staged, not necessarily because of their themes, which we'll, of course, be talking about fairly soon, but because of the stylistic energy that the plays had. His first big hit, of course, was Glass Menagerie, which is very hard to understand as a realistic play. Those of you who know the text of the play can see right away that it has, departs very, very strongly from any kind of notion of, third world realism a la Ibsen. And before that play, of course, he was doing some pretty weird things. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Ishtar or if that's done anymore. But you can see that he was not really beginning on that sort of base. And that, if we go back to the history of O'Neill much earlier, he was certainly not using that language either. And even Arthur Miller, and everyone thinks is a realistic playwright, was hardly that in Death of a Salesman. I mean, when you go inside and outside somebody's head, that sounds more like Strindberg than Ibsen to me. But one of the things that's interesting about this legacy is the way in which these playwrights achieved legitimate voices on the stage. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge, despite the politics, that Elia Kazan played a very central role in transforming this new kind of theater to the contingencies of the stage at the time. We're talking about a time when Broadway was, in fact, a place where interesting theater was being done. That hasn't happened. I mean, that doesn't happen anymore. It hasn't happened for most of my lifetime.
In fact, off-Broadway didn't really exist. I mean, there were...
So all these plays and these playwrights that we talk about in modern drama courses that I've been teaching for centuries now, were in fact done on Broadway. Yeah. Okay, and Kazan played an important point in finding a way to make these plays work. Robert Brustein used to talk about Williams in kind of a lyrical realism, and I think Kazan tried his best to make these plays work in that kind of way. And we need to separate what we know from, say, Streetcar in the movie from Streetcar as it was done originally, not with Vivian Leigh, but with Jessica Tandy, in a production that didn't feel or look the same as what we actually have the literalism of the movie. Brando, of course, was in both of those, as was most of the other class. So Kazan's job was to try to make these things work. And if you look at, I'm not old enough to have seen those original productions. When you look at slides of those shows, the designers somehow had a better sense of what Williams was going for than the actors and the directors themselves. Because remember that Kazan was dealing with actors who had been trained in a heavily realistic actors, quasi-actor studio kind of tradition. And I think that's an important thing for us to think about in place. However, we're now a long way away from that. For a long time, it was very difficult for an actor to play Stanley Kowalski because the image of Brando was so strong. How are you going to erase that? The movie makes it, and everyone watches, late at night, what you see On the Waterfront and Streetcar. And so everyone knows what that looked like and sounded like. So it's a real challenge even for an actor to liberate himself, even if we're not going to do a production of a play that seems very different from that. The question, of course, is when you look at these plays now, and we think about the different kind of stylistic options that were in those plays, The choices that were made by Kazan were, in fact, the choices, very legitimate choices, in his time and in his place, in the theater spaces he was working for, with the actors he was working for, with the audiences that he was working for. We can't do that anymore and make legitimate use of the Williams repertory. They'll become museum pieces. They won't live. And everyone, and a lot of people of my generation who became interested in the theater as actors, scholars, directors, I mean, it was really Williams who turned us on. We saw something there that was simply extraordinary. And when you look even at the shape of the plays themselves, even from an academic point of view, you begin to see things that are quite remarkable. I mean, Williams' characters have this incredible ability to be in the past and in the present simultaneously. You know, usually they have this monologue. In the monologue, they always take you back where where you want to go. They take you back, say, when Blanche talks about the past, or when Amanda talks about the Jonquils, one of the wonderful monologues in the history of the theater. They take you back to this place as though time stops, and without showing it in the past, in the Death of a Salesman fashion, in the very act of speech on stage, you have almost a kind of a classical recreation of the past on stage. So all these kind of tensions are happening in the plays. References that seem off the wall from a realistic point of view just are always intruding in these plays. And I think the option that we have today, if we're going to make these plays as exciting as they were initially in those productions, we have to find new theatrical metaphors, new theatrical styles to recuperate that and I think in that sense the plays will live. I mean, there's no way in which we can recapture that moment in American theater history, but we can recuperate it by thinking about different potentials in the text, different techniques that we have today, different actor training, different directorial styles, different theater technologies that are available to us. And these, of course, are going to be the languages that groups like, especially the premier, in my view, the premier repertory group in the United States is Mad Minds, and it's terrific to see them turning their attention to probably the most famous plays written for the American theater after Death of a Salesman. Okay.
And that's great. And I know, it seems to me that if I had to pick a word that talked about, that summarizes the richness in those Williams plays, that allows us to approach them freshly today, it might be the plasticity of them. And I know Joe is particularly interested in, speaking of plasticity, I'm making this a rather plastic space. The Williams' production notes for the Glass Menagerie talk specifically about
he proposes
a plastic
this idea,
theater.
Right? Yeah. He proposes this idea called plastic theater. He talks about, the Glass Menagerie wanting to throw out kitchen sink realism, that this has been done on stage. It's time to move on, try something else. And specifically with that text, but with his entire body of work. It kind of is the manifesto. He doesn't mention it much, he doesn't talk about it, but the idea is put out there. And basically, he's proposing using everything the theater has to offer. Lights, makeup, design, sound, anything that is in the grab bag of theater, to bring the play, the text, to light in a different way. That it's not a literary theater. It is a theatrical theater that he is striving for. And he's always been an experimental playwright. I mean, this is the opening to the Glass Menagerie, his interpretation of the Glass Menagerie. Some of you may know that the Glass Menagerie does actually have titles projected, cards, right? Kind of what we would think of as Brechtian theater. This is how he originally saw the production. Then it does kind of become commercialized and some of its rougher, more experimental edges taken away. Right? I think Kazan does do this to a large extent. But then you mentioned the designers and how the designers are important to this. Joe Melzner is incredibly important to the vision of Tennessee Williams on stage. Joe Melzner designed many of the sets, and I think Joe Melzner says at one point that if transparent scenery had not been invented, Tennessee Williams would have invented it. Right?
Yeah,
this notion
yeah,
of being, that it's not a solid wall. We're seeing through and beyond this. This notion of Blanche with magic and realism, I think magic is more powerful than realism. And this is what she is calling for at that moment. She's calling for this world on stage where anything and everything is possible. It is a form of expressionism, but it's distinct from expressionism, this type of notion of any trick that will make this better, different, with makeup, light, sound, what have you. Let's try it on this play. It's beyond the lyrical, magical realism. It's pushing somewhere else, right? But he's always an experimental playwright. Never forget also the Glass Menagerie. You know, the narrator is a character. How odd is this? This is, you know, it's not standard realism when you have that happening either.
Yeah. Well, this is probably as good a moment as any to talk about a current production of a great play by Williams, The Streetcar Named Desire, that Maude served as dramaturg for, that Lee and Basil were directors and designers of. And if you've been wondering what these ravishing images are, these are from an amazing DVD that Lee had the Comédie Française people send to me, and it looks like, I think it was either a very dutiful photographer or an automatic camera that seemed to snap. There seems to be a still image taken about every 30 seconds or so of the production.
Well, I'm glad we found this one. This is a little bit Basil and Act Triumph here. This is the card game. You know, our attempt here was to abstract the card game so that it became more a kind of a mimetic dance, a la Buster Keaton, a little bit. And then the set opened up in the middle, and the women came in, and we had the whole Mitch sequence where Mitch falls in love with Blanche at that particular point. But you see, in dealing the cards, it's all done in sound. This is an amplified production, and when he flips his cards out, it goes.
So they're miming the cards, or
they're miming the cards, but they're also doing the audio for the cards into the microphone. So,
which is also unusual for the Comédie Française
I'm sure.
to have microphones for the actors.
They also did a lot of physical comedy, falling off their chairs. Mitch puts his foot through the chair. They get drunker and drunker and drunker. As they get drunker, they get more slow motion. And that allows for the focus on the women when they come in, because by that time they're extraordinarily drunk and very slow motion. Stanley gets his finger caught in a bottle, and there's a whole lot about trying to get the bottle off of his finger. This is Pablo, and Pablo is patterned on Cheech and Chong, and he's always rolling a joint. And and that's Zachary, who we cast with the Zachary is the great black actor from Maude with the Comédie Française. The only black actor from Maude with the Comédie Française. He did Mitch. So this is what we have. Now the screens, I'm going to leave for Basil to explain, because they were the really exciting part. They are the abstractions of the cards themselves, and they keep changing.
Well, just just to say about the images, we have a DVD with a lot of images, but they're a little bit random, the images. So we had them running before, and we did want to at least talk about this one, and then maybe we'll let them run while we talk if they're not too distracting. But to just and Lee should say even more. He shouldn't just toss it. But Lee said to me, I want to do Streetcar Named Desire, and I had done a show, a puppet show, commissioned by the Japan Society, and I had created a piece called Dogugayashi that was based on a specific Japanese puppetry technique. It actually doesn't even exist anymore. It was on the island of Awaji, and it was really a dance of screens, of painted screens, and beautiful images that just kind of created this beautiful bricolage of beautiful images
sometimes
that dance.
Literal, sometimes abstract.
Yeah, sometimes they were figurative, sometimes they were abstract. And Lee said, I want to do Streetcar Named Desire like Dogugayashi.
How big are the screens in the Japanese?
In the Japanese tradition, the biggest screens are about maybe 5 feet tall.
This is Stella.
Yeah, let's pause it here.
There's no staircase. She's flown down.
That was just the moment of Stella.
And here's the scene
Stella.
change after Stella, where we have a wonderful high camp song that John Margolis, a fourth American in it, wrote for him. And he's a Tunisian, but he sings great American style rock and roll. And this is him.
So the Japanese idea was really, I mean, Lee and maybe Maude can speak more about the why we would do it. I just said, okay, and then came in and started bringing in images that I thought were appropriate. We can pause for 1 second, actually.
This is the image of Stanley, which
This is the
tiger.
arrival.
The arrival of Stanley. Size of the screen is Stanley back there.
So the traditional Dogu Gaishi streams are about 5 feet high, and then they get progressively smaller and create a forced perspective. So when I made my Dogu Gaishi, it was about that scale. These were, of course, much bigger, and the space is not horizontal as as most Japanese playing spaces is. It's very vertical, and so we had platforms to create different levels, and the screens, of course, could come in. They could fly in, and there was also this great old stage mechanism at the Salle Richelieu, at the Comédie Française, these old rickety tracks.
Went back to the 16th to 17th century,
That,
so they
that
used to
they
bring the
would bring
wings
in
wings
scenery
in.
on.
Oh, the chariot and poles.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's right. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
they don't use anymore because
Yeah.
it's too clankety clackety clack, and we were like clackety clack, perfect. So we also use those to bring in the screens. So we had because it's a rep system. There's other shows on stage at the same time, so we couldn't have the hundreds of screens that we would have probably used if we had been left completely to do that. But we had a good. Probably, I think, 25 or 30 different screens that appeared throughout the piece, and they each served in. They really, they all came in different ways, served different functions. This one that we're seeing, for example, it's the scene when Stanley sneaks in and he overhears Blanche
calling him an ape,
calling him that he's an animal, but he overhears it. Normally, in the normal stage set where it's the apartment and you can see the two rooms, actually you never saw Stanley. What you saw was this screen slowly come inching in of a tiger while they were talking, and once it arrived, it opened
a lot
and
of
revealed
foreboding,
him. And so so I just looked for a lot of beautiful images and a lot of places to put them and staging that would be interesting, and just and worked with Lee and Maude to make that happen on this stage.
I want to just say one word to give a background to our collaborations. Basil and I have worked together on a number of shows, but we've done two major collaborations. And the difference between working with a designer and working with Basil was that when I wanted to collaborate with him, I said, Basil, let's use your idea and change it this way. And when we did Red Beads, it was using the underwater idea, and let's do this way. Well, do it this way kind of changed it drastically. For example, we used wind instead of water in Red Beads. We had silk blowing, Chinese silk blowing, and all sorts of flying and this and that. But it had the feeling of being water, but it was really wind and Chinese silk that was blown all over. But it was basically fabric in a fluid. And we had characters and we had singers, and it was an opera and all of this, but the costumes were these enormous abstractions that blew like Basil's underwater imagery that went by. When I saw Dogu Gaishi, I said, let's use Dogu Gaishi idea for Streetcar. It'll be a radical connection between the two. And then it was Maude who should speak about the pin that we used as a connection, which was the statement by Tennessee that he felt that with Mishima, that he felt that the Japanese ethos.
The quote is that he says to him, "It's only a decadent Southerner that can understand the brutality and the elegance of the Japanese."
Oh, okay, okay.
And it seems like Tennessee
Williams
Williams felt that the South was a metaphor for Bushido aesthetic in Japan.
I see. Yeah. Okay. That's.
So a lot of these screens are really from Blanche's point of view, and as Blanche's world disintegrating or reformulating. And
Now, one of the most interesting things you should see as a background is that it is not the tradition of the Comédie Française to ever use an accent. it was impossible to try to do French with a Southern accent.
Oh, wow.
Impossible.
Wow.
They do not use accents. They only use classical French that they use for Racine and Corneille, etc. Now, what to do? You can't do Tennessee without an accent.
Right.
Well, Jean Cocteau had done a very famous production with Arletty 20 years or 30 years ago, in which he tried to use a Midi accent, and he was bombed by the critics for it. It was supposed to be a total failure.
And Williams hated that.
Williams
Williams
didn't like it at
absolutely
all.
hated
Yeah.
that.
Williams,
Hated
right.
that.
And but the point here is we had to find a trick, and what we came up with was using this quote, and Williams' attachment to Japanese imagery and his feeling that the Southern ethos was similar in many ways.
Gabe, can you pause it?
This is what. Yeah, pause. I'll finish that in a
Yeah,
minute.
yeah.
What happened was that. Well, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. What happened was that we found out that there was an Orientalist Japanese period in French culture from about 1910 to 1925, which was the key to the Ballet Russe. It was the key to design. It was the key to many things. And it wasn't truly Japanese. It was Orientalist Japanese. That seemed very Blanche to us, It wasn't truly antebellum. It was, Blanche is that, kind of deal. So we tried to do Orientalist Japanese equals Mississippi on this. That was a hard jump for French critics. Some of them really bought it. Some of them loved the metaphor. Some of them thought, what? What?
But that is the idea, sort of, or I think as we conceived it, is as opposed to the screens very rarely convey scenery as a sense of place, but they convey a state of mind, and it's mostly Blanche's state of mind, and the sense of place is these simple platforms, and the place kept changing because there's always a table and there's always a bed. There's always the kitchen and there's always a bedroom. And sometimes the trunk comes in and sometimes a chair comes in. But we never obviously leave the apartment. We're always in the apartment. But we kind of reconfigured it. And also, I think, in a cinematic way, was something that you wanted to do, was to be able to change the angle, change the point of view in a way also because we're so beholden to the Kazan film.
This was an homage.
It's a way to pay an homage to it.
But we wanted to make it a series of film sets that we were showing. So the bed could be here for one scene, the same bed could be over here for another scene, the same bed could be back here, it could be on different levels, the table could be here, it could be moved to here.
The Kurukus.
What?
Right.
The Kurukus.
Yes,
The Kurukus. I never want to do another play without a
Kurukus.
Kurukus.
Yeah,
What is a
had
Kuruku?
I
5
want them to
Kurukus.
follow me in my life. Would you like a drink?
Kurukus are the
have
Japanese kabuki
And then when you're
prop
done
masters.
drinking-
who
Oh,
come in
yeah.
with completely masked and black, and they crouch over and they hand you a prop, and then when you're finished with it, they take it away.
Yeah, I have several right here, actually. They've been
But also, just to interject, these Japanese, this is not unprecedented. There's a lot of Japanese stuff going on. I'm sure a number of people have seen Olympia Dukakis in this very terrific portrayal she has, Mrs. Goforth in Milk Train. And there, all of a sudden, she comes out in a kabuki costume.
That play actually originally has Japanese stage
That's
hands
right.
and screens
That's
that
right.
open and close it. And,
So it's something that's already in the fabric of the play.
Well, we went all the way. We had 4 dancer actors who all agreed to do this thing, and we had a Japanese master who gave, that Basil found, that gave them lessons in the correct offering of a prop. You can't offer a bottle of water like that. You have to offer
that's
like this, and things like that. They're all bent over. What they do after a scene, they have to kneel until they're called on again.
Gabe, will you
this was
pause it?
enormous,
Do you think the production is ultimately more sympathetic to Blanche than to Stanley? The reason I ask that, and I'll see whether Enoch and Joe agree with me, is it seems to me in the history, at least of American productions of Streetcar, most audiences root for Stanley for all sorts of complicated reasons, I think. And it seems to me that the playing field should be a little more level. And you read the play, and it's really Blanche's play more than Stanley's play. But
I think we have to get into gender here. I think most, most gay audiences vote for Blanche, and most straight audiences vote for Stanley. And I think it's as simple as that.
I think actually what's been happening with Streetcar in recent years is that it's emerging more and more, that Stella has emerged as more of a fulcrum. But I think what you're saying is the same way as Dollhouse, the audiences initially ruled for
Torvald.
But there's something about the fact that I think because Stella's performance was not so iconicized as the way that we associate Stanley with Brando, and Blanche with Vivian Leigh.
Yes.
You have a little more maneuverability, and also how we look at battered women and how we look at this kind of a relationship has changed through the years. So there's ways in which I think even our piece with the formal elements or other productions, I've seen 4 streetcars in the last year, there's something about the Stella that draws your attention in a different way.
We had a great Stella.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to make that dichotomy of an audience, straight and gay, and quite that diametric. I think there's a lot more complexity in the audience's feelings for these characters. A lot, of course, depends on your actors and the balance that's established in the play, the kind of the actors you choose who are playing those roles, what they can convey. These Williams women are extremely appealing. They can walk away with the play depending upon how it's staged. Certainly, Williams was very attached to Blanche. When he asked, he said that when was once asked on one of these interminable interviews, who was his favorite figure. He said, well, he's paused for a long time, and then he said Blanche.
Right.
So I think,
but that could have been, Madame Bovary Savoy.
I think what happens, what's often lost in the play, and I've rarely seen this done, where if for instance the audience thinks that Blanche is off center. You have to also understand that, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but if Stanley Kowalski is your idea of healthy masculinity, that is something you need to take up with your analyst.
Yeah.
The thing is that shifted, absolutely.
We understand these characters differently.
But I think it's already in the play. A guy who comes on stage and, and throws the meat on the table, come on. And, when he wants his plate clean, he just throws, my plate's clean, anybody else want a plate clean? This is as much off-center as anything we traditionally said about the female figure. And I think the point you're making about Stella is a very important one, because she is the kind of a mediating figure between the two. And she, we often saw her as the person who was under his thumb. But there's a bit more to Stella than we think. That she's is very much be the focal point to these two very outrageous figures.
But even gender orientation aside, there's also this long-standing American bias toward the plain speaker and the suspicion of the articulate, and so that tends to favor Stanley, because Blanche then comes off as the weaver of all of this verbal Webbery, and so
I've never rooted for Stanley in this play personally.
I never have either.
I've never been able to. Who was originally Stanley? Because it was not Brando. There was another actor that had been cast, and then there's a whole Tallulah Bankhead connection. And, Tennessee sees Brando, and suddenly Brando's in it. I think Brando really clouds our perception of this role.
That's right.
If we think about the recent John C. Reilly production, that's a different Stanley. Who was it? Garfield, right? Garfield. Right?
It was
the original
right.
Stanley. If Garfield had played Stanley, I know it would be a different discussion. But I'm going to get to a moment that I've heard about in this production with Stella, bringing in Stella. Stella swooping down during the Stella moment to rescue Stanley, to save Stanley. Can you describe that moment?
She's going down the stairs, but there's no stairs. So she's falling down.
She flies down. Does she
but she's walking.
embrace,
she goes
lift
down,
him up?
Then she picks up Stanley, and they go off and go to bed.
Do they fly off?
They fly.
They fly off.
He drops his
The
towel,
angel Stella comes down.
Yeah, he drops his towel and he flies off.
and off they go together. It's very beautiful.
Because
It's a hot scene.
that's a magic moment.
Boy, yeah. Talk about getting those colored lights going round and round. Wow.
Plastic. That's using
It was
everything the
a
theater
big
can
deal.
do.
To
Because, you know, that's a very, very good, that sounds great. I wish I had seen it live, because you have the sense always in the play that Williams talked about with that Stella and Stanley at least were on the side of life. You know, so so the play is, you know, not about only the decadence that they sort of take away, and that's a very good image. We're all talking at the same time.
Yeah, we have an interesting simultaneity going on here. See, we're running out of time, and so we're just going to talk simultaneously to get it all out.
Simultaneity.
But-
Simultaneity. It's very plastic. Simultaneity.
Absolutely. So, given the fact that the excerpt we're going to see from your work in progress, from Maude, My Glass Menagerie, is about 20 minutes, you should probably introduce it, and Greg and Maude should probably
Shuffle our way into
prepare to take your seats. And Lee, did you know you were also going to work on Menagerie when you started to work on Streetcar?
No, we
or-
got an idea about halfway through Streetcar to start to think about.
And how much did the Williams centenary have to do with your gravitating toward Williams this year?
Okay. I have to be painfully honest.
You didn't know.
It's very hard to sell shows in this world. And the fact that we had 36 countries and openings for Dollhouse around the world in 7 years was very related to the Ibsen centennial. Okay? There is no question that we were conscious that there was a Williams centennial coming, and that many producers might be more interested in a Williams experiment than something original, for example.
Right.
So yes, that of course influenced a little bit, but we really got into it, and we really think we're creating something brand new. We have taken the two-character play, which is also titled Outcry, a different version of it.
Right.
And there is a beginning before the play, there is an ending, and there is the middle, which is the play itself. And we've replaced the middle with the Glass Menagerie, and therefore drawn trying to draw a line between the continuity of Clara in two-character plays all the way back to Laura, and particularly William's sister. It becomes basically a work about Williams and his sister. And it ends up, the end of the play, she's lobotomized. So that's what happens after going through a number of transitions. This is pretty, I guess you could call it postmodern, but basically the actors play two roles. It also is very Japanese. The actors play sometimes two roles talking to themselves, and sometimes men play women and women play men. And they started playing two plays. And what we found about Williams' dialogue in the later plays is, I think the critics that laid into him were completely off base and completely tilted by the criticism of the 40s. I think he's written some great Pinteresque stuff, and even a couple of mildly Beckett-y things. I know these writers pretty well, and I can just see them. Just like and so what we have here is we have this new collage, between the two plays, but trying to draw a line through them in that this is a work about Tennessee and his sister in the form of first Felice and Lara, and then Felice and Claire, and then Tom and Lara. Okay.
Right. And Greg and Maude are the entire cast, right?
No.
Okay.
We have one of my little people from Dollhouse who is playing a gentleman caller, and we have a second Laura who is the tiniest little person from. It's really very shocking to see she's only this tall.
Yeah.
And so both the whole last scene is done with little people.
Wow.
We have a musician who plays all the way through it, plays the violin, plays the keyboard, plays this, plays that. We make it very lyrical. It's totally abstract. There's almost no set. What you're seeing at the beginning of two-character play, what you're seeing in the beginning is the two actors enter a theater in God knows where. Someplace. It could be in the Balkans. It could be in the way deep in the South. We don't know, And there's nobody there, and the set hasn't arrived, and their crew doesn't arrive, and they think they're supposed to give a play a performance that afternoon, and they enter the theater, and they're going a little crazy. And then we go through that, and the play that they think they're supposed to perform is The Glass Menagerie. So we are showing 20 minutes of the first act. The first act is 1 hour, so we're showing 1/3 of the first act in a kind of a cut that goes back and forth between it, and then the second act is an hour or two. So it's a full-length play when we get it done.
Great. So when we're done with this 20 minutes, we will be it'll be a little before 4. I'll give the panelists an opportunity to ask questions, and then we'll open things up to the audience. Okay, cool.
Act 1. Scene 1. At rise of curtain, I am discovered on stage, alone, since she never enters on cue. I know what that cry means. She's rising reluctantly to consciousness. I understand her reluctance. Cockroach. A humanizing touch. To play with fear is to play with fire. No. Worse. Fire has limits. That's too rhetorical. I'll work over it later. You realize that I'm trying to hold you with an opening monologue that has to be extended through several rather arbitrary transitions. You must never cry out to a person. Take care of me. I'm frightened. Don't know the next step. The one so loved and needed would hold you in contempt. In the heart of this person is a stage whisper. Blackmail. Please! Claire! What do I have to do to get her to give a good performance? She's not easy to fool in spite of being stoned all the time.
Oh. What the fuck is this? Oh my God. This is the set for the Glass Menagerie. Where's the fire escape?
Well, so far only parts of the set have arrived.
Well, what will you do when you're supposed to go outside on the fire escape?
Well, I'll face up stage and you'll say I've gone outside.
Are you serious? Are you going to throw new lines at me tonight?
Well, tonight there'll have to be a lot of improvisation. But if we're both lost in the play, the bits of improvisation won't matter at all. In fact, they may make the play better.
You know that after last season's disaster and the one before last, that we should have taken a long meditative rest on the Riviera instead of touring these primitive, godforsaken shitholes.
You couldn't stop any more than I could, Claire.
Oh, I could have, if you had stopped with me.
With no place to return to, we have to go on.
Please. Where's everybody?
Perhaps you'll find this more illuminating than I did.
Oh, a cablegram.
Yes.
I can't make it out in this sepulchral light?
Never mind, Claire. Give it back.
Oh, no. You strike a match. Your sister and you are insane. Well, having begged and borrowed the money to return to because we have received no pay, strike another.
Signed, the company.
Oh, my God. So the company came to the conclusion that you were a bit dérangé. Not just an eccentric artiste, but un peu dérangé. And you had fallen into a habit of shouting out at rehearsals, "Mad! I'm going mad!" And so finally they believed you. They took your word for it, Phyllis.
When you read the cablegram, did it say that I was insane? Me? Just me?
Oh, no. No, Felice. It said you and your sister. So now I am going into my dressing room until you have announced that the performance is canceled.
I'm going to open the curtains now, this instant.
I told you that I would not perform again in the glass menagerie until you had cut it. Have you? Have you cut it?
Where my work is concerned,
I said, have you cut it?
you're given cuts
Oh, I am.
when I make them.
No, I am not going to be given cuts. I am going to make them myself. Now, can you hear this C sharp? Every time you hear this C sharp, it means a cut is coming at you. And don't try and duck it, or I'll take a walk.
You castrating bitch. You drunk slut. Yes, I did call you that. I don't look at you anymore on stage because I can't bear the sight of your eyes. They're the eyes of an old demented whore. Lewd, degenerate, leering.
I see.
No, you don't see, you're blind.
And you, look, hermaphroditic.
Oh, do I? Thank you.
Bon chance.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My sister and I feel deeply honored to take part in this important cultural exchange. Being artists of the theater, we have been long prepared for working under unexpected conditions. This evening, my sister and I are going to perform alone, since the rest of our company has been delayed by the eccentricities of the weatherbird. Or perhaps I should say the perversities of the weatherbird. It so happens that our favorite play in our repertoire is a play entitled The Glass Menagerie. The play is memory. Being a memory play, it is dimly lighted. It is sentimental. It is not realistic. I will not cut into texture. It is not realistic. In memory, everything seems to happen to music. That explains the fiddle in the wings.
Felice, do you see? The cablegram is still on the table.
There isn't a cablegram in the glass menagerie.
Shh. Well then, take it off the table. Where I can see it. Because when you see a thing, you can't think it doesn't exist unless you're hallucinating, and you know you are.
There now, it never existed. It was just a moment of panic.
Oh, what a convenient way to dispose of a panicking moment.
Dismissed completely like that.
Deception. Deception. How was the DAR meeting, Mother? I did not have the strength to go. In fact, I did not have the courage. Why, Mother? What are we going to do? What is going to become of us? What is the future? Mother, has something happened? I will be all right in a minute. I'm just bewildered by life. Mother, I wish you would tell me. This afternoon, I stopped off at Rubican's Business College to speak to your typing instructor and introduced myself as your mother. Wingfield, she said. We don't have any such student enrolled at the school. Well, I assured her that she did. I wonder, she said, if you could be talking about that terribly shy little girl who dropped out of school after only a few days' attendance. No, I said, Laura, my daughter has been going to school every day for the past 6 weeks. Excuse me, she said. And then she took out the attendance book, and there was your name, unmistakably printed, and all the dates that you had been absent. I still said, oh no, there must have been some mistake. There must have been some mix-up with the records. And she said, no, I remember her perfectly now. Why, her hands shook so that she could barely hit the right keys. And the first time that we gave a speed test, she broke down completely, was sick at the stomach, and almost had to be carried into the washroom. Oh, I felt so weak. I could barely keep on my feet. All our plans, my hopes and ambitions for you, just gone up the spout. Just gone up the spout. Like that. Laura, where have you been going when you've been saying, pretending that you were going to business college? I have just been going out, walking, deliberately, courting pneumonia in winter with that light coat on. I couldn't go back there. I threw up on the floor.
I don't want to hear anymore. I'm going out. Out! 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 Because I'm... Come back here, Tom Wingfield. I'm not through talking to you. Oh, go it up. I think you've been doing things that you're ashamed of. That's why you act like this. I don't believe that you go every night to the movies. Nobody goes to the movies night after night. Nobody in their right minds goes to the movies as often as you pretend to. People don't go to the movies at nearly midnight, and movies don't let out at 2 a.m. in. Come in stumbling, muttering to yourself like a maniac. You get 3 hours sleep and then go to work. Oh, I can picture the way you're doing down there, moping, doping, because you're in no condition. Ding. Don't grab at me, Mother. Where are you going? I'm going to the movies. I don't believe that lie. I'm going to opium dens. Yes, opium dens, dens of vice and criminal hangouts, Mother. I've joined the Hogan gang. I'm a hired assassin. I carry a Tommy gun and a violin case. They call me Killer. Killer Wingfield. I'm leading a double life. A simple, honest warehouse worker by day, by night a dynamic czar of the underworld, Mother. They call me El Diablo. Oh, I could tell you things to make you sleepless. My enemies plan to dynamite this place. They're gonna blow us all sky high, and I'll be glad, very happy, and so will you. You'll go up, up, up on a broomstick over Blue Mountain with 17 gentlemen collars, you ugly, babbling old witch.
My glass menagerie.
I won't speak to you until you apologize.
Tom, speak to Mother this morning. Make up with her. Apologize. Speak to her.
Her not speaking, is that such a tragedy?
Please. 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 Please.
Tom, speak to Mother this morning. Make up with her. Apologize. Speak to her.
Her not speaking. Is that such a tragedy?
Please. 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 Mother, I apologize, Mother. I'm sorry for what I said. For everything I said, I didn't mean it.
My devotion has made me a witch. And so I make myself hateful to my children. Eat a bowl of Purina.
Just coffee, Mother.
Shredded wheat biscuit.
No, Mother, just coffee.
Well, drinking too hot liquids makes cancer of the stomach. Put cream in it.
No, thank you.
Too cooling.
No! No, thank you. I want it black.
Where's your muffler? Where is your wool muffler? Put it on. Tom, I haven't said what I had in mind to ask you. Down at the warehouse, aren't there some nice young men?
No.
There must be some.
Mother.
Find out one that's clean-livered, doesn't drink, and ask her out for sister.
What?
For sister, to meet, get acquainted.
Oh, my God.
Will you, please?
Yes! We are going to have one.
What?
A gentleman caller. Laura. Laura. Come here and make a wish on the moon.
Please. There's someone with their back to the stage as if they were giving a lecture.
Well, that's the interpreter.
Oh, my God. He's telling them what we're saying.
Well, naturally, yes, and explaining our method. That's what he's here for.
I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to do next.
I know what to do.
Oh, and what would that be? To sit there staring all day at a threadbare rose in a carpet until it withers?
Oh, and what do? What splendid activity are you engaged in besides destroying my play?
Your play. But you wrote it for me. And I want to go out. Out! 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 Oh, Ella. Cartwright, this is Amanda Wingfield. And how are you, honey? How is that kidney condition? Horrors, you're a martyr. You're a Christian martyr. That's
Claire! My sister is not herself today. And you babble away to someone who thinks it was a Christian duty to have us confined. Claire!
You shouldn't have spoken that word. Confined. That word is not in the play.
Oh, a prohibited word. When a word can't be used, when it's prohibited, its silence increases its size. It gets larger and larger till it's so enormous that no house can hold it.
Then say the word. Say it over and over. You perverse monster. Scared? You afraid?
I
You
won't
afraid?
do lunatic things. I have to pretend that there's some sanity here.
Oh, is that what you're trying to do? I thought you were trying to go as far off as possible without going past limits. Confined.
All right. Okay, now enough.
Oh, it has a sophisticated society background. It's all about the horse she said on Long Island.
Ladies and gentlemen, an interval of 5 minutes.
15.
10. Thank you.
I had no idea wow, that was really, really exciting.
I just wanted to say a word that I'm very, very grateful to have two wonderful actors to work with on this particular project, both Obie Award winners. Greg Martin winning for playing the drag fool in Lear with Maude Lear, and Maude playing Nora in Maude Dollhouse. And I love the way they're starting to work together.
So, we could share, or we could.
Here, you want my
So,
mic back?
how literal does the lobotomy become? And I assume it's in both Clara and Laura, or some amalgam that winds up.
It really is aspects of one person, the sister,
Right.
And it's we do it with a slightly surreally, in which she's in a chair, she's finishing the last words in the dialogue of two-character play, and the two kind of strange stage attendants that have been part of the production up to that point approach her with a long knife, and you basically indicate the lobotomy, and she screams, and that's the end. But we wanted to try.
Tom's exit, too.
Yeah. The basic metaphor that we're working for here is Grand Guignol, and we thought that would be a smart take on two-character plays, and particularly putting a nice parenthesis around Glass Menagerie, which had a point of view that wasn't necessarily sentimental, but there was the sentimentality, the really great sentimentality did poke its way through in many of the speeches, and so they're very, very moving, but we also had a way of adjusting it so that we're looking at it ironically, and but it actually becomes a Grand Guignol because that's what we thought two-character outcry really had become, and that's where we were trying to go.
We've just begun playing. We're just in the sandbox.
We're still working, and we don't know exactly how the lobotomy is going to be
Need some
staged,
funding money to do some rehearsals.
but we will find out. And after that, there's the speech of Tom's the exit speech in which he said he went away. Well, this is kind of what happened to Tennessee. When Rose was lobotomized, Tennessee was away in school, and he really kept, it created a tremendous guilt to him that he wasn't there to prevent it or didn't try to prevent it. And he spent the rest of his life trying to atone for this, taking care of Rose, traveling her. I remember one wonderful thing in his diaries where he tried to get her to London because she thought she was the Queen of England at that time, and wanted to set her up with one of the royalty that he knew in London as having, servants and queens and attendants and everything around there. And then he said a really wonderful thing. So there's no difference between a crazy person and an artist. They just want to live in their fantasies, so.
But for me, as an actor, a couple of things that emerged as we just started to play with this a little bit is that there's a way in which I feel like I hear the relationship, the parent-child relationship differently. I understand Laura a little differently as coming out of Amanda, and Tom as coming out of Amanda as well.
Right.
So, and then I think this question of how siblings, or how we appropriate memory, or how we reconstruct memory, who owns the memory of your family memories, and then of course how an artist then appropriates memory. How much does he need Rose to be who she was in order to be able to do what he did?
We will entertain questions or comments from anybody out there.
I just wanted to say that, in context of the centenary of Tennessee Williams, that One Arm is going to be produced off Broadway, which is a short story of Tennessee Williams.
One Arm. Moses Kaufman is the
And my understanding is that Williams was hired to do a play script, or a screenplay, and then it's a screenplay that's being brought to stage. But
it's a combination of the screenplay and the short story, and
Right, but it's just a piece of information.
I'm sure some people here saw the Worcester Group's recent production of Bucaré, and Milk Train, of course, is still right. Is Charlie Sohn here? Hey, say, how was it? So great. I know Charlie went last night, and so
you want to see Olympia Dukakis because this is a remarkable performance. She's, of course, a great actress and a great fan of Mad Blue Minds, and she's also, this is one of the great performances she's given in a very distinguished career. So even if you don't like the play or if you have some problems with Tennessee Williams, you got to see her in this. She's wonderful.
And if anybody doesn't know Olympia Dukakis, she's the person who in Woody Allen's film Mighty Aphrodite is Jocasta, and at one point says, "Do you know what they call my son in Harlem?" And anyway.
What?
Motherfucker!
Can I say something?
Sure.
Oh, a question. I have a question.
Hey! Hi,
Roger, how's it going?
Good.
Sociology. My name is David Havens. I actually studied with Roger about 15 years ago at Oberlin. So, and I went on. I've lived in Japan since then, probably, and I go back and I spend a lot of time there. About half my time in a corporate role, back and forth between Japan. So my question is, as someone who studied Japan, often sociologists who portray Japan in different eras will say there's either the Japan boom or the Japan down. It's not just America, but a Western fascination where we're either really attached to Japanese culture and everyone wants to do something Japan, or everyone's really afraid of Japan. I guess the last time would have been in the 90s when with the economic boom. And I think it's kind of interesting that also in Tennessee Williams we look at the centenary and see how it's been adapted and how society is looked at in different ways through different generations. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how the two may overlap. Why Japan now and why we see it so much, not only in theater, but you're seeing the influence where kids love anime, and it's finding its way into more cartoons than Disney now, and you're seeing different aspects of whether it be Japanese food culture, just all different aspects of that, and the same kind of aspect of how Tennessee Williams has also taken different turns. So where do the two overlap? And can you speak to that interaction? Anyone?
I just had one short thing to say. I'd like to just start this conversation. I wanted to talk about Stanley and his green hair.
Where does that wig come from?
Now,
Sixth Avenue.
Sixth Avenue.
the idea is kind of complicated here. Again, going back to the fact that one cannot duplicate Brando. It's impossible. You make a fool of yourself trying to do Brando over again, and you're just biting off an impossibility. It's arguably the best film performance of the century, and. So what Eric and I did, and Eric is the lead actor for the Comedy Princess. He plays all the romantic leads and stuff like that. He never had a chance to screw around. Never had a chance to be crazy. We conceived of Stanley absolutely in opposition to Brando. First of all, as a working staff, we had a timeline that went from 1950 to 1990. So if you see him going out on the party, he's in a leather suit, a little bull, kind of post Elvis, a little boy, the long hair, child of the 60s, etc. But what happened is that what I felt was that using the poker metaphor all the way through, which was critical to the whole thing, that Stanley was the Joker. And, instead of, Sun car stud, the last line, which means nothing in French. It can't be translated. We were trying to go for something like Jokers are wild, or something that implied that Stanley the Joker wins. Well, going and spinning on Joker, we start dealing with the entire sexual issue of the fact that Brando has basically, established the iconography for male sexuality in the world from 1940 to 2000. But then things changed, and male iconography became more androgynous. And, we've got Miss Jagger, we've got blah, 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 blah. But what we really ended up with was the new icon, which was Heath Ledger. And so I and Eric went for Heath. We wanted to go Heath on this, but not Heath in Brookback. Heath as the Joker. We wanted Stanley to be crazy. Most people who work in the level Stanley does in the South are cokeheads that I know, And we assumed that Stanley was kind of a cokehead and that the alcohol was a metaphor for what he would really be now, in a sense. And that what he did in the opening kind of Mardi Gras sequence, which you've seen, he stole this green wig and he kind of used it as his symbol, as this, cock of the walk thing. And particularly when he was coming in to rape Blanche on scene 10. But then we got into this very complicated situation where, this is the second time, one of the sexual metaphors for Stanley in Blunt and Blanche is to shave. So he would put on all of this, all this soap and give himself a white face, which was the Joker face. And then he handed the razor to Blanche, and he kind of, suggested that either Blanche cut his throat or shave him. And Blanche, of course, with her duality at this particular point, chose to threaten to cut his throat, but actually shave him. She started shaving him, but then she got the idea of the white face and took the shaving cream and sprayed it all over his face, like that, completely. And that's what gave Stanley the idea of the Joker idea, and he took Blanche's lipstick and he gave himself Joker lips, And so when he turns, he's the Joker. And then in the fantasy of Blanche, when she's really out of it, there are 10 Jokers. All my Bunraku people had identical wigs, and there were, I think, 6 Jokers behind Stanley that formed a Joker chorus. That was the key to the rape, and that's the way that thing worked.
Yeah, Lee,
So the Japanese level is that a lot of people thought it had nothing to do with the Joker. It was a Japanese mask, and I realized it actually did allude to kind of kabuki makeup.
Well,
and so we have crisscross there.
And something that Enoch said earlier, it's in relation to this hyperbolic sexuality. Have you or any directors that you've known ever chosen to do kind of a Stanley drag in reverse? In other words, to have a woman with a strap on?
There have been many
Split Britches did it.
Split Britches. Yeah. Right. Bell Reprieve, actually.
And what we had right after the Stella scene is we had a high drag parody of the Stella scene that was sung during the scene change. By a great guy, Tunisian.
See, the thing, Lee, I agree with you completely about ideals of masculinity having changed a lot since 51. But when I look at Brando in that film, and even more so on the Waterfront, I think he is pretty androgynous. Actually, I mean, that's part of his appeal, is that there is this softness.
Well, here we go
to
from
him.
the 40s to 2000. In the 40s, no one would believe that. I'm sure.
You're right.
And now everybody understands.
But you know what?
that
Eric Bentley.
Marlon was bisexual, and he, and constantly in his life, and so the androgyny is real. It's right there, and it gives him this kind of extra punch, of attractiveness and electricity that he has.
If you look at Eric Bentley's essays in the collections called. What's it called now? What is theater? In Search of Theater. Anyway, his reviews from the late 40s of the original Streetcar on Broadway, and then some subsequent productions, he actually said he thought Brando was too feminine for the role in 47.
Well, who played it after that was, the guy who played...
Quinn.
What? Yeah, Quinn.
Anthony Quinn.
Anthony Quinn, right. That's
and
right.
There we go. That's full-out animal.
Exactly.
Some of the question here.
Yeah.
Just to answer quickly the Japanese question.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I don't have much what to say about it. I just know that every collaboration that we have done has involved some sort of Japanese aesthetic. I mean, your use of puppetry comes right from an appropriation or an homage to the Japanese bunraku and the really astounding theater traditions in Japan. And that has actually been from work even before we started working together 15 years ago. So
I think unquestionably the Japanese aesthetic has been the most important influence in my work in theater. And this is where Basil and I connect, because both of us are in love with the Japanese aesthetic and what it can do and all the different parts of it. And, the big work I've been working on for a long time is basically an attempt to, La Divina Caricatura is an attempt to transmute serious bunraku to English,
Yeah. And of course, the way that relates to the overall title of the panel is that, whether it's kabuki or bunraku or no, it's an anti-realist tradition, and it's a tradition of metamorphosis.
I just used the alternation of, motivational and formalist. And formalists could embrace all of these, the Japanese tradition, surrealism, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yes.
Some of what you were saying, talk about. But when I came here, and I've been to many of the other events, I really thought it was kind of a stretch. Williams and the Japanese. I know about Mountain Mines and all the wonderful things, but I had no idea the approach of the whole horizontal, and they had vertical space. And I started to think back for a moment that Frank Lloyd Wright was very influenced by Japanese architecture and the whole prairie scene and so on. We know Merce Cunningham was working out the space with the kabuki and all the that material. But my experience in Japan, as I was sitting here, brought back to me the connection that I can find with Williams using a Japanese culture. I think it's succinct in a book called The Sword and the Chrysanthemum. Have violence and beauty.
Right.
And that's what Williams has. Violence and beauty.
Yeah. And Mishima called it brutality and elegance. That's exactly what Mishima called it brutality and elegance. That's exactly what you're talking about.
And also, we've seen the exquisite chiffon with the Japanese prints, and there is the lyricism and the poetry, but there's also the tightness, the space. Everything is tight, everything is beautiful, and you can cry from all the little beautiful windows and the origami and all of that, but there still is the violence and the pornography. I went in the street and I see these machines, and what is going on? It's beyond comic books, it's beyond, it's sex and porn 24 hours a day. So there is a very easy way that I see the sexuality and the bisexuality and all of that connected in some way with Williams. And I had no idea when I walked into this room that I would pick up any of that.
Well, don't forget also that the set directions for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, that play is entirely set in the bedroom of Jack Straw and Peter Ocello, the two old gentlemen who used to run this plantation that Big Daddy, who admits to having knocked around in his day, somehow got from these two men. He's now him. But it describes their bedroom as having these Orientalist touches, the exotic, right? And that's kind of supposed to be the audience's clue into these men's relationship in some way.
Right.
Yeah, so the Orientalist is scattered completely throughout Williams.
So my question these are my comments. My question is, over the years we've seen the French and the Japanese have this beautiful alliance. How was this received? How was this...
This was talking
We
about some of
got-
the American elements of the piece, wasn't it? When actually
Yeah, we
started
got
the piece.
what was people told me was the best review ever given by Figaro, which called it was all genius. We got dumped by Lamond, who said, "Where's all the Tennessee realism, and why didn't we do it Kazan way?" We got a couple more raves and another, kind of bad newsy. It was completely split, but that isn't the way it's been received. It's sold out totally through June. I didn't get a ticket, and I get millions of calls for, "Can you get me in? Can you get me in?" So. Everybody feels it's a grand success and that it's much better that it was controversial than that it got blatantly good reviews around.
It's brought a lot of younger audience to the comedy. Which they're very
Yeah, it changed the comedy audience. It really did.
What I wanted to say earlier about this was when you, which was the thing you're doing on Outcry, the two-character play. That's something I think we all want to keep an eye on, because these late plays have been received very poorly by critics in the United States. Not necessarily in Europe, but in the United States. In Germany and elsewhere, there have been remarkable productions of those late plays.
We thought that the beginning and the end of Two Character was kind of brilliant and that it was completely misjudged and a real tragedy that it wasn't appreciated.
Right, because I think the point is that there are two things I think that are going on here. One is that traditional theater practitioners and critics who are, according to Tom Stoppard, three places removed from reality. The point is that they're still looking at Williams with this kind of 40s mentality, and so when those plays were done, they were imposing a style on it that was never there. That may not have really been there in the early plays either. So that didn't work. So the idea is to try to find in these late works something that is very sympathetic to the Williams aesthetic, given what we have at our disposal today, if we are thinking outside of the box and outside of the box set. And so I think that when you begin to see what's happening here with Outcry, and the way it comes out of and goes back to and has a dialogue with the Glass Menagerie, you can see that this is what this play is. These are the kind of things this play is trying to do. And I think we'll probably, this is I think very, very important for us to find new language, a new theater language which responds to what was in fact a new theater language in Williams. I mean, he had already done something. He was going to do something else now. And I think the theater was very reluctant to give him that license. And, we always do that. I mean,
most playwrights go from being kind of avant-garde to being commercial.
Right.
He really did go from being commercial to avant-garde.
That's right.
So
That's
expectations are different.
Good point.
Enoch, did you see the poem, the Tennessee Williams poem in the Current Issue of the New Yorker?
Yes, this week's or last
This
week's?
week's
Yeah.
I'm curious. It struck me that must be late from late in his career.
Well,
Which one is this?
I actually have it right here. Funny you should ask. This is the poem that was on page 31 of the April 4th edition, which is, Your Blinded Hand, which is what you're referring to. And again, you can see, Williams himself, it's so very important when you think about where Williams is coming from, how he found an escape in poetry. He was a boy. He was not at all what his father wanted to be. His father wanted to be sort of American boy, whatever that's supposed to be, sort of, macho in the most sort of stereotypical way, and he could never do that, and he found his escape in poetry. And that's so very important to know about Williams, that there's this very delicate, sensitive young child, and a father who is not really capable of dealing with a boy who had that kind of sensitivity. And so he retreated into poetry and literature in that regard, which is a tremendous escape for him. And I think that's a point of departure for Williams, and that's, I think, a point of departure for this whole discussion we're having. This tremendous,
Poetic realism.
Well, another thing about realism I want to say is that I think we should want to be careful about that because, John Gasker many years ago, famous Yale professor, talked about the notion that realism, you have to think about it. You shouldn't have a kind of stereotypical view of it. It's multivalent. He always talked about the multivalent possibilities of realism. And we sometimes think of realism, we think of an Ibsen, we think of something like
early
that.
Ibsen,
Ibsen in the middle period, but I mean, Ibsen was nuts. When you go to the late plays, I mean, my God, whoa. I mean, When We Dead Awaken, I mean, my God, Strindberg seems like a movie by comparison, a realistic movie by comparison. So I think we have to be careful. The isms are really academic constructs. These plays have a life of their own. I mean, they want some oxygen, and on one hand, we have to be careful about labeling them because that undermines the potential of the play. Sure. And I also think we have to be a little careful about reading them too closely to Tennessee Williams, a kind of a sub-autobiography. It's useful, but it does. The play is something else. I mean, the play has a life of its own, and we have in the theater practitioners. It's easy to talk about it; it's hard to do. The theater practitioner's job is to try to find the life of that play. And there are many ways in which that dialogue goes on. What Nabu Mines does is in my view, a very healthy dialogue about the life of the play. To find the life of the play, which is something I think that we see happening in this tremendous stuff that you did on Streetcar and what's emerging now with the two-character play. So
we kind of have a point of view, and I think that would help clarify just about everything. We think realism is just another style.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
And that, we know that a style that happens to be in agreement socially, that if you do realistic things, like I take this bottle, and I take a drink, I'm in style, but if I take the bottle and I throw it at Basil, and all over his face, I'm more abstract. You look
possibly.
And the point is, I know people that live in surrealism. They're crazy, or they do a lot of drugs, but they live in surrealism. There's no question that they live in realism. It has nothing to do with that. So, and Grotowski's very interesting technique earlier was to try to get through this control of realism that permeates our lives to a point in the mind that's more surreal or more, that has a higher formalistic aesthetic. You see somebody who's a little crazy spinning in the middle of the street with the cars go by. That's not realism,
Or real.
And so what I think is that all of these different styles, futurism, surrealism, this and that, the academics have kind of pigeonholed. They're all in our minds, and they're all part of our minds. It's just we've kind of agreed that in order to talk to each other and be Greek and and rational about all of this, that we have to accept that certain kinds of behavior and movement are realistic. But they're not. They're just another style, and you might as well, be working in in a Matisse.
In fact, if you look, if you really study the Brando performance in the Kazan film of '51, the performance that had audiences saying, "Wow, it's not even acting; it's authentic." It's now you see. It's a bag of tricks, a wonderful bag of tricks, but you can break, it's the way he tugs at his ear, the way he pulls his
realize
t-shirt,
that he's
the way
eating in half the shots of the film. He's eating something. So he's always talking like that. So it feels a lot more realistic if he's sticking like that and talking, But the key to our interpretation was a comment by Brando that he wished he had found a way to get more humor into Stanley. That's the only thing he thought he missed, that he didn't get enough humor into Stanley.
Because Stanley is a funny character. He's
Stanley is a high-style character, and he was written by Damon Runyon. And the fact of the matter is that if you understand that Stanley speech is Runyonesque. This is where the French translator had a heart attack. He said, I can't write Runyonesque dialogue in French. It doesn't exist. If you looked at old Jean Gabin films and this and that, so yes, you can. Let's pick up some old Bogart imitations and things. But the point is that Stanley could walk right out of Streetcar into Guys and Dolls without the slightest, there. So you have to see Stanley as purely Runyonesque and a high-style character. And also Stanley speaks probably New Orleans accent, which is not a Southern accent. It's more like Detroit. And, New Orleans has a very complex mixed accent and stuff like that. But the whole bit is, style. Realism is just another style.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been very patient. So.
You've actually gone into the area that I wanted to talk about.
Who are you?
A little bit. I am Jonathan Mormon. This discussion reminded me of something that at a panel that Joe moderated a few weeks ago, another Tennessee Williams scholar, and that sat.
Oh my God! What did we say?
What?
I said, "Oh my God! What did we say?"
What did we say?
What stuck in your head?
She commented that, I've been working on an early play of his, Strangest Kind of Romance, and I can say this is true. He was an experimentalist from very early on. He went from, you say, going from being commercial to avant-garde. He went from being avant-garde
Perceived,
to being
right.
commercial.
Perceived and pushed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He went from avant-garde to being avant-garde.
The stories are wild, though. I mean, you get to the stories that really take off. Desire of the Black Pursuer and, One Arm and things like that are just over the top and brilliantly non-realistic in a way.
Kill Chicken and the Closet Queen, all
Yeah.
that stuff. This is actually specifically to you, Lee, but anybody could address it.
Yep.
Is thinking about Williams as an avant-garde, in other words, trying to find something new artist. And Lee, I would want to particularly get your opinion on this because you've worked considerably on Beckett. You've also worked considerably on rock and roll, which are arguably two different ways of hurtling into the future that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so forth. Where does Williams fit in that?
Good question. I feel that Tennessee was very susceptible to European influences and was really cut down when he tried them. And all the Glass Menagerie stuff, I feel I'm looking at, Piscator, Breps, blah, 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 little Bauhaus here, and I think he knew all of this, and I think that, New York still hasn't accepted the Brechtian epic drama that in the way that it's pretty much dominated Europe and everything like that. And I thought that toward the end, when he started experimenting, he had a lot of other influences that he could see. He could see Beckett, he could see Pinter, he could see Ionesco. There's moments of pure Ionesco between Claire and Felice. And moments of Beckett. Greg's opening speech might as well be Ham a little bit about, a kind of deal. And of course, we did a Ham on it, and Ham, of course, is double-edged. He's a ham, and he's this great big, But the point is, I feel that Tennessee still was able to preserve an individuality. In other words, he didn't decide to imitate Beckett or Pinter or Ionesco. What I thought, and this is why we decided to use Southern accents on this, that his inner dynamic and his sense of language was so distinctive that he brought these elements into him. He didn't go to them, that he was something different. And that if we can really get a hold of a great cut of one of these late plays, you're going to see something like really great Pinter or something like that, that people will take entirely seriously, abstract. And he also had a great sense of high camp comedy.
But your question also makes me think about a couple of years ago we taught I think it was in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and they wanted to present like 2 days of Tennessee Williams scenes. It's just coincidental. But as we started to work with them, we would be commenting on a scene and we'd say, but do you understand that this character is homosexual? And the student, really? Right? Okay. Oh.
The Russians didn't want to believe it.
And then we'd do the next scene, and it's like, and we'd be talking, and we'd say, and you do understand that this character is homosexual? oh, okay. And we get to the next scene, and we go, and so we think you've missed the fact, and they go, really? This one too? And we got to this point in the day where the teacher actually stood up at one point. There was this like old Soviet style, and there was like the 4 teachers on one side, and then working, and went, no, this is not true. This is not what Tennessee Williams is. and we said, well, I'm sorry, but he is talking about freedom and sexual freedom and sexual identity. And it was an interesting, and
We can say we do know that Tennessee Williams was very interested, in theater, and that throughout his life he was going to see all sorts of experimental theater. He did go to see the Ridiculous Theatrical Company.
He saw the Ridiculous.
He saw the Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Did he see Madame Minds? That was going to be my
I don't
because he dies in
know.
83.
I don't know, but I have a very dear friend out there that produced him late in life. I don't know, Sharon, if you wanted to say anything about that. When you produced the late.
I didn't actually produce it, but I was working on a production. But that was very straight. It was the Alliance Theater in Atlanta around 78, 79, and they broke back up. They called it Tiger Tail. It was something very.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I think he wanted to do it differently, but it didn't quite work. And then he was, when did he die?
83.
So it was just a few years before he died. He wasn't in great health.
But constantly striving to see new forms of theater, try new devices, and so he was actively out there seeing the work of his day, right? And
I am
part of the
so overjoyed that you said that he saw the Ridiculous, because Charles was
Secret
one of my
Lives of the
idols,
Sexes.
and the Ridiculous has influenced me probably more than any other theater, and is even influencing some of the stuff we're doing in Two Character, and stuff like that. There's no question that Charles was a genius, and that theater was highly, highly, highly special.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christina Frias. I had the honor of being born on March 26th, so it's quite lovely to be here today. I just did a play, Camino Real, in Pasadena at the Boston Court Theater. And what we know is that it was like a smashing failure when it was written, but it was written, I believe, between like the height of success of the Glass Menagerie and the Rose Tattoo or something.
Right.
And while our production definitely, had a healthy run, there were certainly people who left at intermission or fell asleep, and it's a structurally really challenging play. But a lot of the themes are still to this day obviously very relevant. And I think partly it's that idea of stomaching what he was writing about, the desperation, the poverty people were living in, the haves and the have-nots, and so many themes that ring true today. So I guess one of my questions is, what do you know about Tennessee in terms of him writing such a play during this period of all these other successes? Like, what was it about this particular play that did not succeed, or was a reflection of his sort of experimental style that allowed him to continue? I'm not being very clear, but if you could, shine any light on what that was about for him.
Well, I just want to shine one light. I am not that familiar with the play, nor am I familiar with the transition into the style of writing from what he was doing before. But I do have a fair idea that Kazan blamed himself for the failure of this play, and it was beyond Kazan. There was just no question. Kazan couldn't turn it into the kind of poetic realism that he had done the other plays. He had to define it in terms of some of the basic styles it was written. It was iconographic. He could have gone to Giraudoux, to the satin slipper, to many European models, to certain Breton models. There was a lot of ways to do it that would have been felt really, really right. But Kazan, who I think is a genius, was the head of the Actors Studio, and he was obligated to use Actors Studio people who were trained to do a certain kind of realism, somewhere between kitchen realism and socialist realism, And I think that, that when he got his actors into this, they hadn't the faintest goddamn idea what to do with some of this stuff. What am I doing with this bottle? No, you're posing like this. Well, I can't pose. I don't know why I'm posing. Blah, 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 blah. But this is Actors Studio stuff. And, I'm a member of the Actors Studio, so I know it pretty well. And those kids just kill themselves to get realer and realer and realer and realer. But as far as getting more formal and formally informed and stuff like that, can you do a Chinese opera sequence? No. Can you tumble? No. Et cetera, et cetera. So what we have is we have a play that didn't have the people or the director that knew what the hell to do with it. And I think that might be one problem. I think that play, sooner or later in life, will be some unbelievable success. That's what anyway, that's what.
And, also, Tennessee Williams himself, he often referred to the play as Camino Real. Camino Real, which is kind of, puts a different kind of spin on the whole thing. Yep. And, plays that have like a Baron de Chaloux, from Proust, this is really something very against the realistic tradition as it had been explored by Kazan and others. I think Tennessee was just stretched, he was trying to do something else. Bright artists do that. I don't think Williams repeats himself. I think too many theater practitioners have repeated a certain style. But I don't think that he does that in his plays if you follow the whole trajectory. In that sense, Camino Real is a very interesting transitional work.
And the episodic structure of it, block 1, block 2, block 3, that's a tremendous deviation from either Streetcar or Menagerie or Cat.
But I think later on he makes fun of himself.
Yeah, that's right.
He's making fun of different devices that we use.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, Lee, about kind of another key moment, at least for my perception of Streetcar, and that's the paper boy. Tell us about the
did you see the?
I don't think I missed that slide. If I did see it,
the first image I saw today was of the paper boy.
We had a great paper boy. He was about 18. He was a wonderful actor. He looked like a little teenage Brando, and he was and we decided to make him very, very sexy. And
he was a midriff, right?
What? Yeah, Basil, why don't you describe the imagery on this, because it had a lot to do with Basil's screens.
Well, there was you wanted him to be like a sort of a California boy.
Yeah.
And he was wearing jeans and had a half shirt, and he was blonde and very angelic looking. And then there was an image that's used frequently in the kabuki or the bunraku theater, which is a waterfall, a layered waterfall. And so there was a waterfall that started to come in and kind of crush or compress the scene as Stanley is sort of menacing Blanche.
The feeling that he knows about Shaw.
The things that he knows about what happened in Laurel. And what happens eventually is this waterfall closes, and then it opened and revealed this boy. And
because this is one of the moments in the play that is talked about as one of the gay moments in the play. Blanche is basically doing 1950s gay-style cruising. What time is it? Do you have a cigarette? Right? This is a gay.
And also, I got to keep my hands off the boy.
The French actress played it quite subtly. It was actually a very moving scene. But, she was incredibly attracted to the boy. She wanted a cigarette. She didn't want him to go. Yes, she was using all of these devices, but we didn't camp up.
And so time is fluid in this production, then. So this image can be from today, and we can still be in the 50s. And
it was, we had a totally iconic newsboy. He was just, Jimmy Dean plus, and she was very, very good in that scene. And I think that I felt a real attraction between them, and a real desperation that she couldn't take another drink, she couldn't touch him, she could only kiss him once.
Yes, let me kiss your lips softly on the mouth.
And his exit was quite moving, and then instantly Mitch appears with a flower, and Mitch, who had seen as a Hell's Angel on on a motorcycle before, had shaved his beard off and put it so it looked a little bit like he was walking out of The Sopranos, But there he was with all 300 pounds of them, and off they went on their date.
And all the fantasy of the waterfall was gone.
Yeah.
Can we order out for dinner and just bring it? That's what I'd like to do, actually. That would be so great if we could continue.
Do we have time for one more question?
Do we? You know better than I do.
I think we could take one more question.
Okay.
That's it.
I'd like to make a quick announcement as well as a comment. Jenny Lee of the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Columbia in Butler Library. We've just put on an exhibit that will be on at least through July 1
from the Tennessee Williams material that's at Columbia.
Great.
Great.
A lot
Great
of
to
it
know about.
came from the Key West house bought in 1994, including, thanks to Thomas Keith, we have 4 of his typewriters on exhibit. We have 6 of his paintings, including his own portrait of Frank Merlot. But one of the great treasures of Columbia, in my opinion, is his copy of Hart Crane's poems that he kept with him his entire life. He wrote his address on the fly leaves.
Wow.
So please come.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've never seen the paintings, if you know Tennessee Williams as a playwright, a poet, a short story writer, and you've never seen the paintings, do yourself a favor and see the painting. It's a whole other world with Tennessee Williams in the painting.
And read the stage directions. Oh my God, the stage directions are just such.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.